In this module, we're going to do an exercise on sales crediting. In the last module, we talked about what sales crediting is. As we discussed, when anonymous transactional data comes in, there's a need to massage that data in order to understand who are the people that are due to receive sales credit. We determined that there are 3 approaches to conduct sales crediting within the application. There were direct crediting rules, roll-up hierarchy rules, as well as team crediting. So in this module, what we're going to do is we're going to log into the application and explore sales crediting. In your labs, you should have an exercise for sales crediting. I ask you to take that out, and we're going to walk through that together. To get started, what I'm going to do is I am going to navigate over to the Fusion Incentive Compensation application. Again, starting from the login screen, I'm going to log in with our demo character, Ed Kelly. I'll put in my password. In order to access sales crediting, we're going to go to an area that we've already been to before, the same area when we went in to import our participants, and that's under a section called Participant Assignments. In order to get there, I can click the shortcut on my navigation here in my GSE environment, or I can go to the navigator and click Participant Assignments. But since it's here, I'm just going to select the icon at the top of the screen. Within participant assignments, in an earlier lab when we were hiring our participants and then importing them into incentive compensation, we came to this screen and we selected import participants. We also talked about if there was additional or ancillary employee or participant data that we wanted to bring in, we could upload that via the participant details. We could also do the individualized participant goals or quotas and import those per participant as well. But what we want to do is we want to focus in this section down here that says credit rules. And within credit rules, we talked about that there are 3 primary ways to do sales crediting. There's direct crediting rules, there are the roll-up credit rules, and there are the team credit rules. If I drill into the direct credit rules, I'm brought to a screen. Let me hide the left navigation. I am brought to a screen where I can search for particular credit rules, as well as I can see the hierarchies that are in place. So right now I have 2 hierarchies, one for global high tech, and then we created a second one, or it looks like we retired one for 2014. If I expand out global high tech, I can see a series of parent-child relationships. So underneath global high tech is North American sales and corporate. Underneath North America, there's key accounts, North American business sales. Maybe give myself a little bit more real estate. Sales consulting and consumer sales. If I drill into North American business sales, I can see that there are a number of children underneath that, and I can keep drilling further and further underneath that. Whenever I go into a sales crediting rule, under direct crediting, let me scroll down a little bit. I talked about this in the lecture, that there are 3 subtabs. There's the overview subtab, there's the credit receiver subtab, and there's the qualifying criteria. Instead of clicking through one that's already been created, let's go to the top and create something from scratch. Now, if I wanted to create a crediting rule that's a child of an existing hierarchy that's already in place, I would simply highlight that node, that parent node where I want to place a child, and I would simply select Create Node. But for this exercise, let's actually create a whole new hierarchy. Again, with Fusion Incentive Compensation, you could have as many hierarchies concurrently as you want. So let's create a new parent hierarchy. I'm just going to say Create Hierarchy. And for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to name it with my initials, which is JL, and we'll call it a rule. So my JL rule. I can set the effective start date and end date. So let's say that this rule is in place from January 1st of 2015 all the way through December 31st of 2015. And then I can select Save and Close. and I've now just created a parent node for a new rule. Now this parent can remain on its own, or I could add children underneath it. But for this lab exercise, let's just keep them solo. So underneath the JL rule, again, there are 3 subtabs. So the first is the overview. And so the overview, this is where I can name it. I named it JL rule as we did a minute ago. I could add a description. This could be the sales crediting rule for Jason Lowe as an example. This is very on the micro level. Typically, crediting rules would be done far more on a macro, but because this is a lab exercise, we're going to make this as specific as possible. Again, I said that this rule is independent and its own hierarchy. If, however, I decided that this rule that I'm creating was going to be a child of another parent, I could simply go to the drop down for parent and I could select place this rule underneath another node. On the left hand side here are also this thing that says rank and winners. This is actually very important. What rank does is rank says in which order should the rules be processed. So I may run all the rules with a rank of number 1 first, and then once all the transactions have been evaluated through that first level, that all the rules that start with rank level 1, I can then go to 2, and then I can go to 3 and 4, and etc. So within the application, as a business user, I can set priorities to determine the order that the rules will be evaluated. In addition to rank is this concept of winners. The winners says how many rules are going to win. If we leave it at the default of 1, then what that means is as soon as a transaction matches with the criteria in this rule, the system is then going to stop checking for additional rules that might be eligible for this transaction. Alternatively, I could have set a very high number of winners. What that would mean is you may find situations where you want all transactions or all qualifying criteria to be evaluated, and anyone that matches any combination would receive a sales credit. So again, there's a lot of power simply with just rank and winners. Rank prioritizes the order. It tells the system in which order should we evaluate the rules, and winners says how many of those rules can win. If it's a number of winners is 1, that means that the highest rank single value of winner is the one that wins. Conversely, you might have a situation where you want everyone that could be eligible to receive sales credit based on the criteria within the transactions to receive a sales credit. Again, it's just an option for you. And that's the overview tab. I'm going to skip the credit receivers right now, and I'm going to go to the 3rd tab, which is the qualifying criteria. So for the rule, the JL rule, let's go to the qualifying criteria. Now, in your lab exercise, you have a number of steps that are documented for you to create your own crediting rule within the application. I'm just going to show you some of the things that are possible. So, for example, let's say I want to create a rule, the JL rule, and let's say it happens when a certain condition or set of criteria occurs. So, for example, let's say if I click the green plus button, and let's say when the product sold, so let me just type product sold. So when the product sold equals, so the product sold area is on the upper area here, and below it are the conditions. So when product sold, I'm going to click the green button, is equal to, say, widgets, something I mentioned in the last module when we were talking about rep A. So when the product sold equals widgets, and when the, let's say, when the state equals, I click the green plus button. Now you'll notice a second ago I was able to type in widgets. That's because for that field, that's a free text field. State is part of our geography, and so I can simply click the search and I can select what states I want to select. So I could say when it's sold in, say, California, Arizona, and Hawaii. I'm going to say apply and done. So now I have a rule that says when the product sold is widgets and when the state that it's located in is either in California or Arizona or Hawaii. So those are my criteria. Those are my qualifiers. So when that combination happens of when the product sold is widgets and when the state that it's located in is California, Arizona, and Hawaii, then something has to happen. And what's that thing that happens? This is where we go to credit receivers. And within credit receivers, this is, okay, when the product is widget, when the product sold is widget, and when it's in Arizona, Hawaii, or California, then I want to credit, so I'm going to click the green plus button. And let's say I want to credit the person I created, who's Jason Lowe. There's a number of Jasons in the system, so I'll select that one. And we say, okay, we're going to credit Jason Lowe. And we can say, what's the split percentage? And say, well, you know what? Maybe Jason's going to receive 80% of those deals. And it's for the effective period of January 1st to December 31st because it inherited that period that we defined at the overview level. So we'll say, okay, 80% is going to go to Jason, and let's say another person, let's say Lisa Jones. So it's one of our demo characters in our demo environment. Lisa Jones is going to receive 20%. So now I've set up a rule where, okay, a transaction comes in where I've sold widgets and it happens in Arizona, Hawaii, or California. When a transaction comes in that matches those criteria, we're going to say there's going to create 2 credited transactions. Jason Lowe's going to get one of them, and it's going to be 80% of the transaction value, and Lisa Jones will get the other one for 20%. Now let's say there's turnover in the sales organization, and let's say Lisa Jones leaves the organization on August 4th of 2015, which is fine. So we're going to end date her on this rule on August 4th, and then let's add someone else. Click the plus button, and let's add Julian Henderson. So let's type Julian, and Julian Henderson, let's say okay for him. Julian Henderson, we're just going to give him 20% as well, and he's going to take over as of April 5th. Did I say August earlier? I meant April. April 5th till the end of the year. And so now I can split that. So if a transaction comes in, let's say on April 15th, well, on April 15th, it's going to say Jason Lowe receives credit, and he's going to receive 80% of it. And because it's April 15th, then it's going to credit Julian Henderson 20%. Conversely, let's say that there is a cancellation that came in. And there's a cancellation that came in for, say, February 20th. On February, or let's say the cancellation comes in July for a transaction that originally booked in February. So when that happens and the clawback is triggered, it's going to look to say, okay, who received credit for that transaction? It'll say, okay, Jason Lowe was in that position from January to December. So because the transaction happened on February 20th, he is going to receive a clawback. However, Julian will not receive a clawback because date effectivity is throughout the application, and it'll know that he only started receiving credit for this combination of qualifiers on April 5th. Which means if Lisa Jones is still part of the organization, she would receive a clawback even though she is not tied to that region anymore. Now let's also say that Julian didn't stay in the position very long. So let's say Julian's last day in that position is July 31st. And let's say the sales operations team no longer wants to explicitly name who that person receiving the 20% is. Let's say that Lisa Jones or Julian Henderson are on the opportunity and that would have been passed over automatically. In addition to explicitly naming someone, I simply could also say, instead of selecting the individual, let's say, you know what, instead of explicitly naming the individual, let's just credit the participant that's on the transaction. So hypothetically, if you have sales coming in, and some of the people that are being credited are known and are stamped on the transaction, you don't have to explicitly name them in the crediting rules. You could simply inherit it from the transaction. Just say credit whoever's on the transaction. So I'll credit that person, and let's say that they're, again, 20%, and we're going to credit them starting in August 1st. So what we've created here is we've created one rule for Jason, and what that rule says is throughout the entire calendar year from January to December, Jason's receiving 80% of all transactions that are sold in Arizona, Hawaii, and California, and where the product sold was a widget. The other 20%, however, varies between Lisa Jones, Julian Henderson, and whoever's credited on that transaction, again, based on date effectivity. Another thing I should point out is this concept to the right of the date effectivity says roll up to parents. What this allows us to do is allows us to provide conditional roll-up based on criteria within the sales crediting structure. So we talked about when a salesperson sells something, not only they get credit, but their manager may receive indirect credit, and then their manager's manager, and so on. So what I can do is I can conditionally determine, so possibly, let's say for Jason Lowe, whatever he sells in those states for the product of widgets, we're going to say, yes, those are going to roll up to his manager, but maybe for Lisa, Julian, and the other person, it's not going to roll up. So I can conditionally manage which transactions based on which criteria are going to be rolled up through their management chain. And then just to the right of that is this concept called summarize rollup. And what this summarization on rollup, this was actually an enhancement for our very high volume customers. Imagine that you're a telecommunications company, and let's say that you're selling an international plan in one transaction and a data plan in a second transaction, and on and on. Very small transactions where you might be making, as a call center agent, $1 or $2 per transaction. So at the end of the month, it may make sense for you as a call center agent to see all the transaction details, but it may not make sense for the call center manager. The call center manager may be managing a team of 50 or 100 or 500 call center agents. And for each individual transaction may receive half a penny for one or a quarter for another, etc. And that level of detail isn't that helpful for them. So one of the things that Oracle Fusion Incentive Compensation Product Management developed was this concept of summarization on rollup. And so you can determine which resources are going to get the line item information and which resources are going to receive aggregated summaries based on category. Again, this is a decision for each organization. It certainly helps with performance and scalability, but it's just an additional feature that was asked for by some of our customers, particularly our high volume customers. So this is a very basic rule. I've created a rule that says it's a standalone rule. It's not under a parent and it doesn't have any children. So it's just a very easy standalone rule that says for the calendar year of 2015, whenever a product is sold that equals widgets, and whenever it's sold in the states of California, Arizona, or Hawaii, we're going to give Jason Lowe 80% credit for the entire calendar year. And then the remaining 20% is going to be split between some of his peers based on what time of year it is. I say this looks good. It's very simple, but it looks good enough for me. I'm going to click Save. And I'm done. Now the last step, and you're going to see this in your exercise in a minute when you go through and build your own crediting rule. The last thing you need to do is you need to go in and you need to deploy the crediting rule. In order to do that, I go to the left navigation. And then from there, as I scroll down, there is something that says Deploy Credit Rules. So I simply select Deploy Credit Rules. And I'm going to say, let's deploy all the crediting rules for the calendar year of 2015. So January 1st to December 31st. I say that looks good. And I click Submit. Now, the reason we do this is actually for performance reasons. What it does is we have this hierarchical sales crediting tree within the application, and what this does is it flattens the tree so that as transactions come in, the system is able to very, very quickly parse through them to find the appropriate rules for each of the transactions. We deploy the crediting rules primarily for performance reasons. So now that I've deployed the crediting rules, I can simply click View Processes. And then from View Processes, I simply can just hit the refresh, and I can see the Deploy Incentive Credit Rules has succeeded. And that's it. That is creating a direct credit rule within the application. And so that actually concludes this exercise on creating a new direct sales crediting rule.